The Martinez family had lived in Oakwood Hills for 12 years when everything changed. Roberto Martinez worked double shifts at the local factory, while his wife Maria cleaned houses to make ends meet. Their 3 children, Sofia, 18, Miguel, 16, and little Anna, just 8 years old, were the light of their lives. The small ranch house on Elm Street wasn't much, but it was home. Roberto had painted it a cheerful yellow, and Maria had planted roses along the front walkway. The kids had grown up playing in that tiny backyard, and every payment had been made on time, every month, without fail. The Oakwood Hills Homeowners Association had never bothered them much in the early years. Sure, there were the usual notices about keeping lawns trimmed and not leaving trash cans out too long, but nothing serious. The Martinez family followed the rules, kept to themselves, and lived quietly. Roberto's old pickup truck was parked in the driveway, and Maria's small sedan sat beside it. The children walked to school every day, did their homework at the kitchen table, and helped their parents however they could. But in 2018, everything shifted when Patricia Whitmore was elected as the new HOA president. Patricia lived in one of the larger houses on the hill, a massive colonial, with perfectly manicured grounds maintained by professional landscapers. She drove a luxury SUV and wore designer clothes to every HOA meeting. Patricia had opinions about everything, but most of all, she had opinions about who belonged in Oakwood Hills and who didn't. She made it clear, from her first meeting, that she intended to elevate the standards of the neighborhood and protect property values at all costs. The harassment started small. Roberto received a violation notice for parking his work truck in the driveway instead of the garage. The problem was the garage was tiny and filled with the family's belongings: winter clothes, old furniture, Miguel's sports equipment, and Anna's bicycle. There was barely room for one car, let alone the truck Roberto needed for work. When he explained this to Patricia, she smiled coldly and said the rules were the rules. The truck had to go in the garage or he'd face fines. Roberto tried everything. He rearranged the garage, sold some old furniture, and squeezed the truck inside. But then Maria's car had to sit outside. Patricia promptly sent a violation notice for that too. It seemed like every week brought a new complaint. The grass was half an inch too tall. The mailbox needed repainting. There were children's toys visible in the backyard. Each violation came with a $50 fine, and the fines were adding up faster than the family could pay them. Miguel watched his parents stress over every notice, every fine, every threatening letter that arrived in their mailbox. His father's shoulders seemed to carry more weight each day, and his mother cried quietly in the kitchen when she thought no one was looking. Miguel was a good student, played football at the high school, and had dreams of joining the military after graduation. But seeing his family suffer made his blood boil. He wanted to confront Patricia Whitmore himself, but his parents forbade it. "We handle this the right way," Roberto told him firmly. "We don't make trouble." But Patricia Whitmore wasn't interested in handling things the right way. She was interested in getting the Martinez family out of her neighborhood. She began scheduling compliance inspections of their property, bringing other HOA board members to nitpick every detail of their home. The garden hose was coiled incorrectly. The welcome mat was the wrong color. The children's chalk drawings on the sidewalk were unsightly. Every inspection resulted in new fines, and the total debt grew to over $2,000. Roberto worked overtime, picked up weekend shifts, and Maria took on additional cleaning jobs. But they could barely keep up with their mortgage and regular bills, let alone the mounting HOA fines. They consulted with a lawyer, but legal fees were beyond their reach. They attended HOA meetings to plead their case, but Patricia and her supporters dominated the board. Other neighbors who might have been sympathetic were either afraid to speak up or simply didn't want to get involved. The situation escalated when Patricia decided the Martinez house itself was a violation. She claimed the yellow paint was non-compliant with community standards and demanded they repaint the entire house in an approved neutral color. The cost estimate for professional painting was $8,000, money the family simply didn't have. When Roberto explained their financial situation, Patricia's response was swift and brutal. "Perhaps you should consider whether Oakwood Hills is the right community for your family," she said during a packed HOA meeting. her voice dripping with disdain. Miguel sat in the back of that meeting, his fists clenched as he watched his father's humiliation. Roberto Martinez was a proud man who had worked his entire life to provide for his family. And this woman was treating him like he was somehow less than human because he didn't have money for unnecessary house painting. Miguel made a promise to himself that night. Someday, somehow, he would make Patricia Whitmore pay for what she was doing to his family. The breaking point came 6 months later. The Martinez family had fallen behind on their HOA dues because they were using every spare dollar to pay the violation fines. Patricia seized the opportunity she had been waiting for. She initiated foreclosure proceedings, claiming the family owed over $5,000 in fines and fees. Under Texas law, HOAs could foreclose on homes for unpaid dues and fines, and Patricia intended to use that law to its fullest extent. Roberto and Maria were devastated. They had never missed a mortgage payment, never missed a utility bill, never failed to provide for their children, but the HOA had the legal right to take their home anyway. The family hired a lawyer with money borrowed from Maria's sister, but the legal process was slow and expensive. Meanwhile, Patricia pushed forward aggressively, adding legal fees and collection costs to the family's debt daily. The foreclosure sale was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in March 2019. Miguel had just turned 17, and he stood with his family on their front lawn as strangers inspected their home, like vultures picking over a carcass. Patricia Whitmore arrived in her luxury SUV, wearing sunglasses and a satisfied smile. She had arranged for a property management company to buy the house at auction, and she made no secret of her plans to renovate and flip it for a substantial profit. Roberto tried one last appeal. He approached Patricia with tears in his eyes and offered to sign over the deed immediately if she would just give them 30 days to find another place to live. His children were in the middle of the school year, he explained. Diana was only 9 years old and didn't understand why they had to leave the only home she had ever known. Patricia looked at him with cold contempt and said, "You should have thought about your children before you decided to ignore HOA regulations." The auction took place as scheduled. The house sold for $42,000 to Patricia's property management friends, even though it was worth over $160,000 on the open market. After legal fees and costs were deducted, the Martinez family received nothing. Worse than nothing, they still owed money to the HOA for additional fees that had accumulated during the foreclosure process. The family had 2 weeks to vacate. Roberto, Maria, and the children packed their belongings into a rented truck and moved to a cramped apartment across town. Anna cried for months asking when they could go home. Sofia had to transfer schools in her senior year, disrupting her college plans. Miguel watched his family's world collapse and felt powerless to stop it. But Miguel Martinez was not a young man who accepted defeat easily. 2 weeks after his 18th birthday, he walked into the Navy recruiting office and enlisted. He had always planned to join the military, but now he had a specific goal. He wanted to become a Navy SEAL, and he wanted to become the kind of man who could protect his family from people like Patricia Whitmore. Boot camp was brutal, but Miguel thrived. He had been carrying anger and determination for months, and the physical challenges gave him an outlet for both. He excelled in every phase of training, from marksmanship to hand-to-hand combat to leadership exercises. His drill instructors noticed his intensity and focus. Miguel wasn't just going through the motions. He was preparing for something specific. After completing basic training, Miguel applied for special operations training. The selection process for Navy SEALs was notoriously difficult, with a failure rate over 80%. Candidates were pushed beyond their physical and mental limits, forced to perform impossible tasks, while exhausted, cold, and stressed. Many quit within the first week. Miguel never even considered quitting. Every time he wanted to give up, he thought about his father's tears, his mother's quiet crying, and Anna asking when they could go home. Miguel graduated from SEAL training 3 years later, one of only 12 men from his original class of 68 candidates. He had become exactly what he set out to be, a highly trained special operations warrior with skills in combat, reconnaissance, demolitions, and psychological warfare. But more importantly, He had developed the confidence and mental toughness that came from surviving the military's most elite training program. During his 4 years of active duty, Miguel served 3 combat deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq. He participated in high-risk missions behind enemy lines, conducted surveillance operations in hostile territory, and earned commendations for bravery and leadership. His teammates knew him as a reliable and deadly operator who could be counted on in any situation. But Miguel never forgot why he had joined the military in the first place. He kept in touch with his family throughout his service. Roberto had found work at another factory, but the family struggled financially in their small apartment. Maria's health had deteriorated from stress and overwork. Sofia had managed to attend community college while working part-time, but her dreams of a 4-year university were put on hold. Anna, now 13, was doing well in school, but still sometimes asked about their old house. Miguel also kept tabs on Patricia, Whitmore, and the Oakwood Hills HOA. Through social media and occasional drives through the old neighborhood, he learned that Patricia had used the same tactics against 3 other families in the years since his family was forced out. Each time she initiated harassment campaigns followed by foreclosure proceedings, and each time her associates bought the properties at below-market prices. Patricia herself had parlayed her HOA presidency into a real estate career, specializing in distressed properties and neighborhood revitalization. The house on Elm Street where Miguel had grown up was barely recognizable. Patricia's property management company had painted it beige, installed expensive landscaping, and flipped it for nearly $300,000. The new owners were a young professional couple who had no idea of the home's history. Miguel sometimes parked across the street during his leave visits, staring at the place where he had played catch with his father and helped his mother plant roses. In 2023, Miguel completed his military service and returned to Texas as a decorated Navy SEAL veteran with an honorable discharge. He had saved most of his military pay and used his GI Bill benefits to complete a degree in business administration through online courses. More importantly, he had spent 4 years planning exactly how he would handle Patricia Whitmore and the Oakwood Hills HOA. Miguel's first stop was a meeting with a civil rights attorney who specialized in HOA abuse cases. Armed with military discipline and attention to detail, Miguel had compiled a comprehensive file on Patricia's activities over the past 5 years. He had documented her pattern of targeting minority and low-income families, her financial connections to the property management companies that bought foreclosed homes, and her systematic violations of fair housing laws. The attorney, Janet Morrison, was impressed by Miguel's thoroughness. "Most people come to me after they've lost everything," she said, reviewing his files. "You've built a case that could take down this entire operation." Janet agreed to represent Miguel's family and the other victims of Patricia's schemes on a contingency basis, meaning the families wouldn't pay legal fees unless they won their cases. But Miguel wasn't interested in just winning lawsuits. He wanted Patricia Whitmore to understand what it felt like to lose everything she had built through corruption and cruelty. And he wanted to do it using the same systematic approach that had made him a successful special operations soldier. Miguel's first target was Patricia's real estate business. Using skills learned in military intelligence gathering, he researched every property transaction she had been involved with over the past 5 years. He discovered a pattern of insider information, bid rigging, and potential tax evasion that would interest both the IRS and the Texas Real Estate Commission. Miguel compiled this information into detailed reports and submitted them to the appropriate authorities, along with supporting documentation that would be difficult for Patricia to refute or explain away. Next, Miguel focused on the HOA itself. Texas law required HOAs to operate transparently, with open meetings, published budgets, and fair enforcement of rules. Miguel attended every HOA meeting for 3 months, recording Patricia's behavior and documenting violations of state HOA regulations. He discovered that Patricia had been using HOA funds for personal expenses, approving contracts for her friends without competitive bidding, and selectively enforcing rules based on personal preferences rather than actual violations. Miguel then did something Patricia would never have expected from the teenage boy she had helped drive from his home. He bought a house in Oakwood Hills. Using his military savings and a VA loan, Miguel purchased a small ranch house 2 streets over from his childhood home. The previous owners were an elderly couple who had been targeted by Patricia's harassment, but chose to sell rather than fight. Miguel's return to Oakwood Hills created immediate tension. Patricia remembered the Martinez family and wasn't pleased to see Miguel back in the neighborhood, especially as a homeowner rather than a renter's child. She began her familiar pattern of harassment almost immediately, but this time she was dealing with someone who understood her tactics and was prepared to counter them. When Patricia sent a violation notice about Miguel's mailbox needing paint, Miguel responded with a certified letter citing the specific HOA regulation that allowed mailboxes in his style and condition. When she complained about his lawn height, Miguel provided photographic evidence showing his grass was shorter than that of 3 other properties owned by her allies. When she scheduled a compliance inspection of his property, Miguel attended with a notebook, camera, and voice recorder, documenting every aspect of the inspection for future legal proceedings. But Miguel's real strategy was more sophisticated than simply following HOA rules. He began attending community meetings, introducing himself to neighbors, and quietly building relationships throughout the neighborhood. Many residents were tired of Patricia's authoritarian approach, but had been afraid to speak up individually. Miguel gave them a leader they could rally behind, a decorated veteran who couldn't be easily intimidated or dismissed. Miguel organized informal neighborhood barbecues and social gatherings, always including families that Patricia had previously targeted or harassed. He volunteered for community cleanup days and helped elderly neighbors with yard work and home repairs. Slowly but steadily, he built a network of allies who were ready to support change in the neighborhood's leadership. The turning point came when Patricia made her biggest mistake. Emboldened by years of success and confident that she could handle one troublesome veteran, she decided to target Miguel's family directly once again. She began harassing Roberto at his workplace, calling his employer to complain about his criminal son, who was disturbing the peace in Oakwood Hills. She spread rumors that Miguel was dangerous and unstable, suggesting that other residents should be afraid of having a trained killer in their neighborhood. Miguel had expected Patricia to escalate, but attacking his father's livelihood crossed a line that activated his most ruthless instincts. Roberto Martinez was an innocent man who had already suffered enough because of Patricia Whitmore's cruelty. Miguel decided it was time to end this conflict decisively. Using connections from his military service, Miguel hired a private investigation firm that specialized in financial fraud cases. Within 2 months, they had uncovered evidence of extensive corruption in Patricia's business dealings, including kickbacks from contractors, embezzlement of HOA funds, and tax evasion totaling over $200,000. Miguel turned this evidence over to federal investigators, who launched a formal criminal investigation. Simultaneously, Miguel's attorney filed a massive civil lawsuit against Patricia, the HOA board, and several property management companies, alleging conspiracy, fraud, and violations of federal fair housing laws. The lawsuit sought damages for all the families who had been illegally foreclosed upon, plus punitive damages that could total millions of dollars. But Miguel saved his most personal revenge for last. He had discovered that Patricia's own house was technically in violation of several HOA regulations that she had ignored while harassing other residents. Her professionally maintained landscaping exceeded height limits in several areas. Her outdoor lighting was brighter than allowed, and her luxury cars were occasionally parked overnight on the street rather than in her garage. Miguel began documenting these violations with the same obsessive attention to detail that Patricia had used against his family years earlier. He filed formal complaints with the HOA, demanding that Patricia be held to the same standards she had applied to everyone else. When the HOA board tried to ignore his complaints, Miguel threatened legal action for selective enforcement and discrimination. The pressure mounted quickly. Patricia's real estate license was suspended pending investigation. The IRS placed liens on her properties for unpaid taxes. Her HOA board allies distanced themselves, as the criminal investigation became public knowledge. Neighbors who had feared her for years began speaking out about her abusive behavior. Patricia's carefully constructed empire began crumbling. Her real estate business collapsed as clients fled and partners severed relationships. The property management companies involved in the foreclosure scheme filed for bankruptcy. The HOA board voted to remove Patricia as president and hired an independent management company to handle community affairs. But Miguel wasn't finished yet. He had one more surprise for Patricia Whitmore, and it was the most personal one of all. He had discovered that Patricia's house was purchased with money obtained through the fraudulent foreclosure schemes, making it subject to seizure under federal asset forfeiture laws. Miguel worked with federal prosecutors to ensure that Patricia's house would be seized and sold at auction, with the proceeds going to compensate her victims. The foreclosure auction of Patricia Whitmore's house was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in October 2024. Exactly 5 years after Miguel's family had lost their home. Miguel attended the auction along with Roberto, Maria, Sofia, and Ana. This time, the Martinez family wasn't standing helplessly on the sideline. They were there as bidders, armed with resources Miguel had carefully accumulated for this moment. When the auctioneer opened bidding on Patricia's colonial mansion, Miguel raised his hand and submitted the opening bid. Other bidders participated, driving the price higher. But Miguel was patient and strategic. He had studied the property extensively and knew its true value. When the bidding reached a reasonable market price, Miguel made his final bid and won the auction. Patricia Whitmore, who had once told Roberto Martinez that he should consider whether Oakwood Hills was the right community for his family, found herself homeless and facing federal criminal charges. Miguel Martinez, the teenage boy she had dismissed and humiliated, owned her house and controlled her fate. But Miguel's revenge was more sophisticated than simple retaliation. He didn't move into Patricia's mansion or use it as a personal trophy. Instead, he converted it into a community center providing free legal aid and financial counseling for families facing HOA abuse. The irony was perfect. Patricia's former home became a resource center, helping other families avoid the fate she had inflicted on the Martinez family. The criminal case against Patricia resulted in federal convictions for fraud, tax evasion, and civil rights violations. She was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution to all the families she had wronged. The civil lawsuit was settled for $8.7 million, with the Martinez family receiving the largest individual settlement. Miguel used his portion of the settlement to buy back his childhood home on Elm Street from the current owners, who were happy to sell when they learned the property's history. He renovated the house and gave it to his parents as a gift, 40 years after they had been forced to leave in humiliation. Roberto Martinez cried when Miguel handed him the deed, but this time they were tears of joy and pride, rather than desperation and defeat. The story of Miguel Martinez became legendary in Oakwood Hills and beyond. It was a tale of patience, preparation, and the power of using an opponent's own tactics against them. Miguel had learned from his military service that the most effective victories come from superior planning, not superior firepower. He had defeated Patricia Whitmore not through violence or intimidation, but through the methodical application of justice and the law. Years later, Miguel would tell his own children that revenge is best served not hot or cold, but calculated and complete. Patricia Whitmore had destroyed his family because she thought they were powerless to fight back. She had been wrong about their power, and she had been wrong about their willingness to fight for justice. Miguel Martinez proved that sometimes the boy who loses everything can grow up to become the man who takes everything back and makes sure it never happens to anyone else again.